Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Okay, before we get going, just two quick notes. One, I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that over the weekend, CNN was honored with 3 Edward R. Murrow Awards, which, as everybody knows, is among the most prestigious awards in all of journalism. The awards went to CNN for CNN Digital, won the Murrow Award for Multimedia, and the judges said that with animations, inline media, and interactive maps, CNN Digital demonstrates excellence in multimedia reporting. So congratulations to the best digital team in news. In addition, CNN Films Apollo 11 won the Murrow Award for feature-length documentary. CNN was commended for sharing never-before-seen large-format footage of one of humanity's greatest accomplishments. I should note that Apollo 11 has closed out the award season with a Peabody, 3 Emmys, and now an Edward R. Murrow. It's an unbelievable accomplishment and achievement for that film. And in addition, Great Big Stories, The Brave is now an Emmy and also Murrow Award-winning series. The team won Excellence in Video for its terrific profile on Greta Thunberg. So congratulations to the entire team and to all of CNN for these awards. Obviously, Election Day is 3 weeks from tomorrow. Voting has obviously begun across the country, as we've been chronicling. These next 3 weeks will be among the most important that we will cover. And so let's make sure that we are pacing ourselves. But this is our time, and this is CNN's moment. And let's make sure that we are capturing all of that. But against that, COVID continues to play a terrible role globally and in the United States, and is clearly making a very, very strong return right now. And so that is where I want to begin with Matthew.
Thanks, Jeff. So how widespread is that growing surge you mentioned? Consider this. About 20 states are currently at their highest points ever in the moving average of new daily COVID cases. And those states are spread out across every region in the U.S. We are currently at almost 215,000 deaths and almost 7.8 million cases. We saw over 50,000 new cases each day in 4 of the last 5 days, and that daily case average is at its highest in 2 months. Adding to all the warnings we've been hearing about winter, over the weekend, IHME, of course, updated its predictions to 395,000 deaths in the U.S. by February. Jonathan Reiner on New Day predicting that if the trend is not reversed, we will soon see a return of some of the troubling signs of months ago: hospitals filling, elective surgeries canceled, deaths mounting. There is the question of Fauci and what's next after he sparred with Team Trump over that misleading campaign ad. Fauci on the lead today. There is the question of what will be the upshot of all these planned rallies. Every state on Trump's proposed travel schedule so far this week, Florida, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Iowa, are all in the red zone on our CNN map. So we'll now track the exposure risk coming out of all those rallies. We got this rare acknowledgement from Minnesota public health officials who cited 9 positive cases from those who attended the Minnesota rally. And there's even the question of safety at the confirmation hearing with Mike Lee saying he'll attend in person after recovering. In terms of key data points and key regions on our CNN map, 31 states going in the wrong direction, only 3 states down week to week in new cases. The highest weekly increases on that map, the ones over 50%, North Carolina, New Mexico, Tennessee, Montana, and Vermont. Florida, as we mentioned, where Trump heads tonight, back red on the map, slightly up again in new cases after being flat for a couple of weeks following the full reopening. And besides Jim Acosta and Gary Tuchman later at the Stanford, Florida rally, we've got Rosa in Miami looking at broader trends there. In the Midwest, Illinois is now back up and tied with its peak level of daily cases from the spring, which is to say about 2,500 a day. And we have Adrian Broadus in Chicago. In New York, the focus still remains on these hotspot neighborhoods and enforcement, where infection rates are 6 times the state average. New York City announcing that it issued over $150,000 in fines, dozens of summonses for violations in the cluster zones, including businesses and congregations. Field in New York. Montana surged 6-fold in the last month, and Kentucky's governor and his family are quarantining after a positive case on his security detail. On the education front, we have more and more schools each week back in person. Schools are definitely grappling with cases, but big picture, this does not appear to have been the disaster that was predicted over the summer. Preliminary data from Brown University tracking this found confirmed cases in less than 0.2% of students. There definitely has been scattered trouble with closed schools in New York clusters, 9 cases a week since Miami-Dade reopened in person, which is not a large number, but it's an early warning sign. And we have a bunch of schools around Atlanta opening in Fulton County in person this week, and Biana stays on the education front. From health, we are still waiting for word from the FDA about clearing Regeneron's antibody treatment for emergency use, and we're about to put out reporting on new warnings from Democrats on the Ways and Means Health Subcommittee about not letting politics enter this process. We have growing evidence that hearing loss is one of the risks of infection, as with other viruses, and Elizabeth Cohen has reporting on that, as well as the CDC warning of the growing mental health toll of the pandemic. We've got Elizabeth and Jacqueline Howard available from Health Today. In terms of sports and COVID, 5 weeks into the season, 8 games have been rescheduled. The Broncos Patriots have a bye instead of playing today's scheduled game. And then the Lakers championship win puts a button on that NBA bubble season, and it really turned out to be the most successful approach among the sports. Also, just highlighting Ed Lavendera's piece, putting a face on the economic human suffering in Texas. The story of a 60-year-old cook facing eviction. She is just one of the many people, one of 3,000 a week, being helped by a church food bank near Dallas. The wrap piece today on COVID is Erica Hill, 357911. And I'll pause there.
Thank you, Matthew. Okay, because I don't think we can separate COVID from politics, I'm going to move to politics now. David?
Good morning, Jeff. And obviously, COVID remains front and center with the president getting back on the campaign trail. How these rallies are going to be held, and we've seen how they've been held in the past. Don't expect any changes to it. So now that he will be not yet declared negative by a doctor and out and about holding these rallies throughout the country, I don't know how that does anything to his goal of putting coronavirus to the side. To me, it puts it still front and center. I do want to stress politically here that I think if you look at the campaign travel schedules in this week, it's not just that Donald Trump is back on the campaign trail and the whole COVID story I just said, but it is also where he's going and where the Bidens are. I think it tells you everything about the current state of the race. Joe Biden's in Ohio today. Jill Biden's in Georgia, tied to early voting, and Texas tomorrow. Donald Trump has rolled out that he's going to be in Florida, North Carolina, and Iowa. Only Pennsylvania is a more traditional blue state that he's going to this week. My point here is I don't know a Democrat that thought that the Democratic nominee would be spending a day in Ohio 3 weeks from Election Day. Certainly not that his spouse would be in Texas or Georgia necessarily. So it points to the hole that Trump is in on the map and the path to 270 when you see where they're going. And the fact that Pence is in Ohio today, too. Again, Ohio and Iowa, states Donald Trump won by 9 points or so. The thinking was at the beginning of this campaign, they would be sort of off the map by now. And yet here they are fully engaged with 22 days left. So when we talk about him back on the trail, I also think it's important that we look at the politics of these stops and what it means to the paths to 270. Also, because of which I know Virginia will get to the Amy Coney Barrett hearings here, and COVID will be front and center there too in the way that it's being conducted. But you do have Kamala Harris, the vice presidential running mate on the ticket, participating from her office. Again, much like the plexiglass at her debate last week, it just instantly puts that issue and the mismanagement of it front and center in the campaign. She's the most junior Democrat on that panel, but obviously all eyes are going to be on her. The battle for control of the United States Senate is also something that we should not lose sight of. Graham, Tillis, Cornyn, Ernst, all in re-election battles, and they're all on that panel today, and how they deal with the COVID-ness of the hearing, but also their effort to try very much to hang on to this Amy Coney Barrett nomination as a path to rally their base in these closing days is critically important. Speaking of Graham, you saw over the weekend his Democratic opponent, Jamie Harrison, raised a bonkers $57 million in the third quarter. It beat any previous record held in a single quarter fundraising by a Senate candidate by nearly $20 million. That was Beto O'Rourke last cycle. So just to give you a sense of the kind of enthusiasm that exists out there in the Democratic sort of grassroots donor activist world, it's just mind-boggling. Rebecca Buck, actually for Digital, taking a look at how you go about now, talking to strategists about how you go about spending that money all the way down in the home stretch in the closing weeks of the campaign. And again, because of Trump's handling of coronavirus, both over the last many months, but also just over these last 10 days of his own infection and where the public believes he was behaving very irresponsibly in terms of how he handled it with others, that is all a weight on Republicans down ballot. Jeff Zeleny was up this morning with a piece using Iowa and the Joni Ernst battle for re-election there as sort of the lens to look at how Trump is impacting these critical down ballot races for Republicans in this COVID campaign. So Zeleny has that today, and Kate Baldwin went to Battleground, Pennsylvania. A lot of people refer to this as a potential tipping point state. I mean, if that's the case, it is tipping towards Joe Biden right now. Kate Baldwin goes deep to look at the gender gap, the Biden's enormous advantage with female voters is powering his current position in the state. And Kate went and talked to a lot of female voters who, some of whom were with Trump 4 years ago and have drifted away in a story that we've seen play out over the last 2 years in American politics, and just how critical that is in this all-important state. So Kate Baldwin will have that piece today for us as well. And I think that's where we start, Jeff.
Okay, great, David. Thank you very much. David, can you address, is there a story in are Republicans, how high is the anxiety level on the GOP side about the White House and the Senate? And should we be looking closer at Senate candidates moving away from Trump or anything like that?
Right. So that's part of what I was discussing with Jeff's piece in terms of, watching Ernst try to navigate that. You saw it in the McSally-Kelly debate that we talked about last week.
Right.
I mean, there's no the moving away is not a complete, I'm no longer with Donald Trump. I talked last week on one of the calls, right, about Mitch McConnell's comments, right, that he had not been to the White House since August 6th. He doesn't like the way that they've been handling coronavirus. It is sort of in bits and pieces rather than some sort of wholesale, because, as you know, all those Republicans find themselves between a rock and a hard place. They need every single Trump voter to show up for them. So, yes, it is worth looking at that. And I would just note one other thing about the concern you're talking about in sort of the Republican ranks. I mean, I think Ted Cruz gave that notion on Friday when he talked about in a CNBC interview that this, there's concern that this could be a post-Watergate style sort of big blue wave. I don't think that that's a foregone conclusion, but clearly if Ted Cruz is giving voice to that, not just to scare up Republicans to vote, it's because it's a potential outcome here.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, listen, my point was, we're looking at it in the McSally race. We're looking at it in the Ernst race. I'm just trying to step back and look at it in a broader sense. That's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, it's certainly worth doing.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move to Washington, please.
Okay, so just on David said, as he heads off to these rallies, Trump claimed he tested negative, though the White House doctor said his words are, he is not a transmission threat to others. He also tweeted that he's immune. That tweet has been taken down. And also just to note, on the Fauci CNN exclusive reporting over the weekend that he objected to being misrepresented in a Trump commercial where he's saying, I can't imagine anyone could be doing more in terms of the president. The stimulus package, which is just whiplash up on Capitol Hill from Phil this morning, less than 24 hours after Trump breathed a burst of new life into stimulus talks, the effort has again imploded into near fiery death. Pelosi saying 1.8 not enough, and this just supposedly incredible call with the 20 Republican senators, Mnuchin and Meadows, just destroying them over the fact that this would ruin the Republican Party. So it does not seem like that's going to happen anytime soon, but clearly the president wants it, so we'll see what happens. Obviously, the big thing in Washington today is the confirmation hearings of Amy Coney Barrett, who have just gotten underway. Today, just as the outline today, is opening statements. Barrett will give hers around 2:45. We've seen the copy of it. She'll pledge to remove politics from legal reasoning, stressing that policy decisions need to be made from the Congress and the White House, not the courts. Tomorrow will be the day of questioning from the senators, and then Wednesday will be witnesses. In terms of the COVID of it all, on these confirmation hearings, Graham and Feinstein are there. Lee, who also had COVID from the event, says that his doctors cleared him to come. I'm not exactly sure. Again, this all seems to be, it was 10 days ago, and is he clear? And we haven't seen what his doctor said. And then just to note also, Barrett initially failed to disclose these Roe v. Wade talks that she gave, hosted by anti-abortion groups. It was our own case file that unearthed them, and now she has had to update her questionnaire. The Democrats, for their part, game plan is to focus on healthcare and abortion, not the more sensitive issues around religion. And really, there's nothing they can do. And McConnell has said that he would vote before the election, but we don't have an exact date yet. And on voting, more than 7 million people have voted. This morning's issues seem to be focused around drop boxes. There are unofficial ones popping up in California. There was this unlocked one in New Jersey. And in the all-important Pennsylvania, Trump's side had a huge step back after a judge declared these drop boxes were not unconstitutional. Just two other things to mention. This October surprise question mark, the administration working on a new START treaty, and Vivian's working on that with International. And then these just really sharp words from Milley about this claim by the White House, the administration to draw down troops in Afghanistan. O'Brien saying the U.S. would do that, and Milley basically saying that would be condition-based, and dismissed O'Brien as speculation, just showing the military standing up on Afghanistan. And that's what I got.
Okay, thank you. I do want to, before I open it up, I do want to highlight that terrific K-File reporting on Barrett's record, really terrific. I also thought Jessica Schneider's piece laying out Barrett's record, especially going into her background and her religion, that the Democrats are not going to bring up, but I actually think was really important that Jessica brought that up in the reporting. I think that it's something that we should not bury. And I do want to recognize that it was our own reporting yesterday, Caitlin Collins breaking the story about Fauci, and the ad yesterday. It was really, really important. And as Matthew noted, Fauci will be on the lead this afternoon, which I think will be very important. Okay, so before we move to international business, let's open it up for thoughts on COVID, politics, the election, the Supreme Court hearing, and anything else anybody wants to bring up.
Hey, Jeff. Good morning. It's Ben. There have been a lot of questions in my inbox, and I'm sure other places about this, so I just wanted to underscore on the question of why you don't need a negative coronavirus test to leave isolation. CNN Health's Arman Azad filed on this. I will re-up it for everybody, but very briefly just wanted to read a couple sentences because I think it's really helpful. So as he writes, even though PCR tests can come back positive, that doesn't necessarily mean they're infectious after a certain 10 or 20-day window has passed. Think of it like this. A PCR test, which again we know is the very good test, is looking for the blueprint of the virus, its genome, and not for the virus itself. The test is just looking for fragments of the blueprint, and the way that Arman sort of gave an example of this, which I thought was perfect, it's like looking for a recipe for a chocolate cake in somebody's kitchen. Finding the recipe in the kitchen does not mean you will find the cake. So I will re-up this right for everyone. I think it's really helpful, and I would encourage everyone to take a look as we have these conversations about not only the president, but also Mike Lee around the confirmation hearings today.
Thank you, Ben. Other thoughts?
Jeff, as the president goes back on the campaign trail, and as we sort of look forward to it, just a reminder that it wasn't only the Rose Garden event that seemed to have spread the virus. The Minnesota Health Department, as Matthew said, declared that 9 attendees from the Minnesota rally the week before last had contracted COVID and were connected to that event. And to underscore the fact that the Trump campaign is taking really very few measures to protect their attendees, the incredible video from Mike Pence's event Saturday with senior citizens at the Villages in Florida, and most people were not wearing masks, and these were all vulnerable members of the vulnerable population.
I also want to emphasize what David Chalian was speaking about. I do think taking a look at where the candidates are traveling this week does tell that story really well, as David laid out. Other thoughts?
Hey, it's Rebecca. I know I sound like a broken record on this issue, but I think the schools lines that Matthew laid out are extremely important. And now not only that study that came out of Brown, but many, many of our leading health experts are saying it's much more important to get kids back in school, yet tons and tons of school districts are still completely virtual. And I just continue to believe that every day that remains is another day that's a true crisis for parents. And we have to keep shining a very bright light on that, because there needs to be more pressure for schools and teachers unions to answer what they're behind their policies, and science is starting to point in a different direction.
The author of the piece that was in The Atlantic, the economist from Brown, who wrote the piece that generated so much attention, I know she'll be on with John King today. I know. Other thoughts? Anybody else? Okay, International.
Hey, so our air will be filled with a lot of this confirmation hearing today and a lot of what we discussed with Trump and COVID and the election. But as the U.S. has the most cases and deaths of COVID, today we're really seeing other areas of the world trying to get ahead of resurgences. In Europe's cases, as I talked a lot about last week, COVID just continues to be relentless. This weekend, there were more record-breaking numbers. Today, I'll just start in the UK with Boris Johnson announcing new restrictions which divide England in 3 tiers, medium, high, or very high, the latter having the strictest closures, obviously already triggering negative reactions in certain regions. So Nick will be across all of those lines, and Boris has that news conference at 1 today. In France, more cities added to the maximum alert category. Melissa Bell is watching that. Germany's largest cities have all become hotspots, Berlin seeing the most cases. Scott McLean is in Berlin this morning. Russia sees a weekend of record high increases, new infections, especially in Moscow. Fred Pleiken is in Moscow today covering that. Isa Flores has a package pulling together all of these Europe lines in one place. She's also weaving in the protests and weariness of the COVID restrictions that they're seeing across the continent. It's also the Middle East. Iran reached 500,000 COVID cases. Governments across the Middle East struggling to contain the virus. So Ben Wiedemann joins us from Beirut today. A port city in China will test 9 million people in the coming 5 days after a dozen locally transmitted cases. David Culver is on that story. India topping 7 million cases. Veritas has that story. And in Brazil, we're seeing the most dramatic pictures this morning. Authorities had to shut down a department store after massive crowds crammed in for its grand opening. Brazil has over 5 million cases. It's half of the entire region. So Matt Rivers has that. In short, really, it's that despite Trump's claims this weekend that COVID is disappearing, clearly the numbers globally indicate it most definitely is not. So outside of COVID, the only other thing I'll mention is that there were reports that Trump is looking to Putin to close the deal on a pre-election nuclear agreement. We did hear from Peskov this morning. He said it's too early to discuss any final agreement, though Russia does want to take action before the February expiration date. So again, Fred is in Moscow if anyone wants to do more on that story. And that's where we start.
All right. Thank you very much, Penny. Business?
Jeff, good morning. With stimulus talks all but dead, investors' attention turning to earnings. Tomorrow kicks off earnings season in earnest. Morgan Stanley reporting first. Third quarter earnings, according to CNN Business, expected to be miserable. Goldman, which reports later this week, telling Reuters this morning that it is considering scaling back its financial targets that they set earlier this year as the pandemic rages on, hindering growth at the bank. Dow futures are flat this morning. As part of the president's tweet storm, I want to point out the president continuing to warn of the effect of a Biden presidency on the stock market. He tweeted, remember, stock market at all-time high and going up 401ks at a record. It's worth noting, continuing to hit this, the stock market is not the economy. Roughly half of American households own no stocks, and the wealthiest households own the vast majority of stock market wealth. Clearly seeming out of touch with the struggling Americans, 30 million Americans on some form of unemployment right now, but he is rebranding the recession as a Trump success. We are heading into the highest jobless rate heading into the election in 75 years. Allison Cossack and Christina Alessi are both up and available on that. So just wanted to mention that. Those millions of unemployed clearly watching the whiplash over stimulus that Virginia just mentioned. Hill team tracking all those developments. But the big story this morning over the weekend, Trump claiming without evidence he is immune to coronavirus, as Virginia mentioned. Twitter did place a warning label on that tweet saying it violated its rules. Unsurprisingly, Facebook did not, even though the same exact message was shared on Trump's own Facebook account. CNN's Stoney O'Sullivan is up on that. He has repeatedly asked Facebook for comment and continues to be met with silence. Finally, in tech, this morning, Microsoft announcing it has disrupted a massive hacking operation that it said could have indirectly affected election infrastructure. The company saying today that it took down servers behind what is known as TrickBot, an enormous malware network that criminals were using to launch cyber attacks, including a strain of highly potent ransomware 3 weeks before the election day. Brian Fung up and available on that. And that's where we begin today.
Okay, I think that's a really important story. Does anybody have anything they want to bring up before we move on to digital? Okay. Digital.
Hey, good morning. 34 million unique back on Friday, a very strong Friday, and then over the weekend was about 25 million for Saturday and Sunday each. This morning, audiences just showed up for our Amy Coney Barrett hearings, DLE. It's about 10,000 right now. We're capturing all the moments in live streaming. Then it's that Microsoft story that Richard just mentioned. They took down the massive hacking operation that could have impacted the election. So we're up with a version 1 on that, and we will stay on that. There are thousands of people who are signing up to be deliberately exposed to COVID. This is from Phil Black and team on the people signing up for trials, and it's focused on the UK campaign called One Day Sooner, and just some really good, just personal anecdotes about what's motivating people to do that. Trump is taking his COVID misinformation machine back on the road. That's Collinson in the top 5. The Dallas Cowboys quarterback suffering a devastating injury. And our exclusive from Caitlin still, with Fauci saying he was taken out of context in the Trump ad, is still in the top 5. The top video this morning, and has been for the last 24 hours is John King breaking down the Electoral College projections with Trump pulling ahead in just one battleground state. We have just a really good lineup out on Amy Coney Barrett. In addition to the daily and the live stream, we've got a strong main bar from Marianne DeVoe. We've got Joan Biskupic on what Barrett, Republicans, and Democrats said about religion at her controversial 2017 hearing. You guys mentioned the outstanding K-File piece on how she initially failed to disclose her talks on Roe v. Wade, and then just a what to watch for and just great background pieces, what she could mean for Obamacare, gun rights, her abortion record, et cetera. So super strong package there for today and this week. Also, the headline on schools that we're going big with, and we'll put in the T1 at some point this morning, schools are 2 months into reopening and no one is keeping track of how it's going. There's nobody nationwide looking at this. That's Grayer, Goldriga, and Pomeranz working together on that piece. The Jacqueline Howard piece, Matthew mentioned on how the pandemic is taking a toll on those with mental illness, and just mental illness and mental health being an important thread to stay on the longer this goes on and as we get into winter. Hurricane Delta, that was a strong performer over the weekend for the obvious reasons. Thousands remaining without power and in shelters after an already devastated Louisiana coast was hit. So we want to stay on that. We have great pieces in advance of Apple's new iPhone that is releasing tomorrow. It will likely have 5G, so we have a piece on will that be useful or not. We have a good analysis from Dave Goldman on iPhone. Once the height of innovation is now kind of the safe standard. It's like the Toyota Camry of phones. And we have a what to expect from tomorrow's event. Twitter flagged Trump's false claim about his COVID immunity. Facebook, however, again, did absolutely nothing. So we will stay on the beat and business of holding the platforms to account for their action and inaction in this case. Black Americans are paying more to own a home and falling even further behind. Transgender voters face a unique form of voter suppression. If their ID doesn't match their gender presentation, they could be turned away. This is a good piece from Scotty Andrew, who also, lastly, has a piece for today's holiday with the headline, "Here are the states and cities ditching Columbus Day to observe Indigenous Peoples Day." That's it.
Thank you very much, Meredith. John.
All right, so Trump gets back on the road today. So we'll be at the White House with John Harwood and Caitlin Collins outlining all those key spots where he's going to be hitting, starting with Florida tonight. We have Dr. Joshua Sharfstein, formerly of the FDA, Celine Gounder, as well as Dr. Peter Hotez, to look at all those questions that Ben just raised about when can you leave isolation. And then we have Olivia Troy also on Fauci said his taken out of context. She has a lot of insight into how all this runs inside the White House. The bigger coronavirus story, Elizabeth Cohen on the cases that are spiking and the alarming trends now that we're in the fall season. At 11 a.m., there is going to be a JAMA release that about the deaths were higher than expected from March to August. We have Alexandra Fields in New York City, Adrian Broadus in Chicago, looking at the fines and the issues happening in the Midwest. And then Ed Lavenderis' Texas piece will air next hour. We do have the public health director from Bismarck, North Dakota. North Dakota has the highest case per capita in the nation right now. There's only one ICU bed left in her general area. She's very concerned. And as you mentioned, Jeff, we do have Emily Oster of Brown University with John King, with her provocative article, "Schools Are Not Super Spreaders," kind of defying some of the conventional wisdom that's out there. Mayan Role also joining John King on the NFL schedule, continue to be juggled, and international whips. Jessica Dean is with Joe Biden, is campaigning in Ohio. He has a 1:15 speech. Nick Valencia on the early voting begins in Georgia, and then Kristen Holmes sweeps with the voting issues with a big focus on drop boxes. The Jeff Zeleny piece on Iowa voters also gets to the Ernst race that will air during the John King show. And finally, the Amy Coney Barrett hearings. We're taking key opening statements. Graham Feinstein later on today, Kamala Harris, all ahead of Barrett, giving her opening statement. That'll probably happen sometime during the 2 o'clock hour. Jeffrey Toobin, Joan Biskupic, Gloria Borger, Abby Phillip up around that. Manu Raju and Phil Mattingly cover from the Hill.
And just so everybody's aware, we are going to take the full Q&A tomorrow of the hearing but we are limiting the opening statements to just those 4 that John outlined, just so everybody's aware. Washington.
Good morning. So, as mentioned, we're pre-taping with Fauci in the 2 o'clock hour, and we'll air it at 4. We'll probably go a couple blocks with him. We'll see when Amy Coney Barrett's opening statement actually starts. So I do think it's likely to run until 3 p.m., so we'll do that. Also at 3, Caitlin Collin from the White House, our lead on Biden. Erica Hill has her coronavirus wrap spot, and we've got Dr. Jean Marazzo with us as well. Sheldon Whitehouse from Judiciary can join. We've got Nia Malika Henderson, Jackie Kucinich. Caitlin has a donut at 4. Dr. Seema Yasmin also available, and then we'll get Pam Brown's war on voting package, drop boxes, and more today. And then at the end of our hours, Trump is on the South Lawn. We'll just see what he says, if he says anything noteworthy.
And in the Situation Room, we'll keep a focus on all the latest COVID threads as 31 states move in the wrong direction. We'll dig into all of that with our medical voices, as well as the Erica Hill rap piece. Jake's Fauci interview will obviously play prominently in our coverage, and we will have international whips. We'll be looking to see if the president speaks as he departs for Sanford, as well as where the Trump campaign is focusing in these last few weeks before the election, as well as any growing insecurity from Republicans in Congress. We have Acosta from the White House. In terms of the Amy Coney Barrett hearings, we do have Dick Durbin. We'll talk to him in addition to our legal voices about what comes out of that today. We'll make sure to highlight the K-file reporting from over the weekend. And we also have the Pam Brown voting rap piece, and that's where we start.
Okay, thank you, Kurt. Does anybody have anything else they want to bring up?
I have 2 things. One is I didn't watch all of yesterday, but in terms of the New York Times stories about this so-called quote-unquote Trump swamp, is there more stories that we want to do to kind of follow up on that? It seems to be pretty comprehensive and eye-opening and troubling, and that's one. And then the other thing on Columbus Day, where banks are closed, the post offices are closed, a lot of U.S. government offices are closed. The question becomes, should we continue to have Columbus Day be a federal holiday? I mean, we don't have one on Election Day, but we have one on a date where more and more Americans are realizing what a racist, murderous bastard Columbus does, and our government is closed to honor him and name it Columbus Day. That's it.
Okay. Provocative debate for sure. Anyone else? Okay, there's a ton going on. Let's remember, COVID is sweeping the country as we see the highest number of cases in 2 months at the same time that Trump says it is disappearing, and he's back on the campaign trail with rallies. So I think that's an enormous story in the midst of everything else that's going on. It's not lose sight of what COVID is doing to the country, and obviously the candidates out on the trail. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.